Welcome into the Football Guys Fantasy Football Show. We're taking a look at the Week 9 waiver wires, and I'm Alfredo Brown, joined as always by Dave Kluge. And Dave, it's not pretty. It's not pretty this week.
I mean, the thumbnail is going to say like must draft players to win your league that you need to pick up. We're kind of
That's a really long title.
I don't know. I mean, it's gonna Cedric Tillman is a league winner, right? Like
Must add players to pick up in your league if they're available to win your league in Week 9.
yeah,
There you go.
but really, it's not a great week. I mean, there's a few
No.
guys that I like, but it's a pretty rough week out here.
Yeah. Well, let's get into the must add league winning players available Week 9 waiver wire targets.
We should be happy
But
though. I mean, this is like no teams were on bye this week, and we still were able to avoid a lot of serious injuries. I mean, there were some injuries for sure, but given how the first 7 weeks of the season went, I think we came out of week 8 rather unscathed. So a short waiver wire episode is a blessing in disguise.
yeah, the only thing that was injured down here in Miami is the pride of sports fans. After the Dolphins lose by 1, and then the Dwayne Wade statue got revealed, and it looks horrendous.
Yeah,
Did you see that yet, Dave?
I did. Yeah, it's maybe better than Christian Ronaldo's. It's but
It's
not
not
good.
saying much. Yeah, no, it's Lawrence Fishburne in a Dwayne Wade jersey. It's not great. Poor Dwayne Wade. All right, let's do this like we always do every week. We do our waiver wire draft where we're going to be picking up players off the waiver wire. Dave, as always, you got the first pick. Who are you going with?
I'm going with Bo Nix. This is a pretty easy one for me right now. Since week 5, only Lamar Jackson and Baker Mayfield are outscoring Bo Nix, and this guy's still available in about 65% of fantasy leagues out there. So a lot of people started picking him up last week or the week before, but he just keeps getting it done. And he had 61 and 75 yards as a rusher in last week and the week before. This week, we saw the rushing production fall off a little bit, but he made up for it by setting career highs in passing yards and passing touchdowns, 284 yards and 3 touchdowns. I think the tough thing with Bo Nix, and a lot of people are going to want to pick him up, you look at these next 2 weeks, and they're pretty tough matchups. He's got to go up against the Ravens and the Chiefs, so you're hoping that the game script can work in his favor and put him in a position where he needs to run and throw a lot. But he's playing good football right now, and this team reminds me so much of the Broncos team last year, where they were like a punching bag, and everybody talked about how bad they were and how bad Russell Wilson was. And then you check the record, and it's like, wait, they're above 500, and Russell Wilson actually isn't playing that bad. And I think we saw through the first 2 weeks, Bo Nix was terrible. I mean, he had 4 interceptions in his first 2 games. He had that one throw where he kind of split 2 open Broncos receivers. I get it. Like he's an older guy. He's very memeable. A lot of people are going to find reasons to pile on, but he's playing mistake-free football right now. He's got 1 interception in his last 6 games. They're winning, and I know a lot of that has to do with the run game and the defense, but Bo Nix is playing a pretty good game manager role right now, and he's scoring fantasy points. So pick him up and put him on your roster.
I like when you be rabbit. I like when you do that. You go and you say all the bad things about the player because this is everything we talked about pre-show. Yeah, I mean, yeah, Bo Nix is he's obviously a fantasy startable asset. That's where we're at there. I'm not ready to say he is a good NFL quarterback, but everything you said is true. The Broncos are winning games, sure. But he's been what, quarterback 4 over the last like 3 or 4 weeks, something like that. He's
Quarterback
been
3. You were not
there you
listening to
go.
me, Alfredo. The only guys outscoring him, Lamar Jackson and Baker Mayfield.
I mean, you said a lot, Dave. You said quite a bit. Also, you did say that the Ravens are going to be a tough matchup. They're giving up like the 3rd or 4th most points to quarterbacks, and they've had a lot of injuries in their secondary. So it could be another really good Bo Nix week in Week 9 going up against Baltimore.
It could be, yeah. And I think the thing with a young quarterback is you always get scared when there's a good pass rush, and the Ravens and the Chiefs both have a good pass rush that can throw him off his game and throw off his timing a little bit. But this is a guy who has looked better just about every single week. I mean, he had that one blip. Who was the game against where he had like 52 passing yards, or 60 passing
It's
yards? Whatever.
all
Yeah, he had that
it's,
game
it's
against the
all
Jets in week 4. That was a big step back. But since that week where he just really unraveled and had a terrible game, he's been playing pretty good football. So yeah, I mean, I think especially with Purdy on bye next week, a lot of people are going to be scrambling, looking for somebody to put in their lineup. I think if you've got Purdy on bye and you're looking for somebody, you can pick Bo Nix up and plug him in, even with a tough matchup against Baltimore.
Yeah, that's where we are in fantasy football. Just plug in, honestly, just plug in whoever's healthy, whoever's giving you decent points per game right now. Anthony Richardson, we're not talking about him here on the waiver wire show, but
Oh, he's
that's
droppable at this point in fantasy. I mean,
what a there were people that were clamoring for him to be the quarterback 1 this
mhm.
year, and I saw that in a lot of draft rankings. That was like a little too rich and too crazy, but this is bad. This is bad. You know that Drake May outscored Anthony Richardson this week
Yeah,
on only
in a
20
quarter of football.
snaps. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we can go on and on, piling on with Anthony Richardson. I mean, it's just it's bad. At this point, I just don't know what the plan is for them. Like, are they going to bench him? You know, he was a developmental guy when you drafted him, and clearly putting him out there every single week isn't helping with the development. But I mean, this is still a guy who's only started a handful of games in the NFL. I don't know what they do. I mean, I'm looking right now. I was at consensus with Richardson this offseason, and I had him as my QB6. So it's not like, we were deluded into, it's not like we were delusional thinking that Richardson would be good. The whole industry, the entire consensus was behind him. You look at what he did on a per dropback basis last year, but yeah, I mean, he's at the point now. Yeah, if you've got Anthony Richardson, cut him and get Bo Nix because I don't think it's going to get much better for Richardson.
Did you see? I mean, I'm not condoning this, but did you see the tweet that someone put out where it's like, "Oh, I'm Anthony Richardson. I either throw 70-yard touchdowns or I poop my pants."
Hmm. That's pretty much it.
It's
Yeah,
it's sad that's what we're getting to with him, where there was
the Adam Dunn
so
of
much hope.
quarterbacks.
Yes, yes, exactly that. Home runs or strikeouts.
Yep.
All right, we're going to keep going along here. Before we do that, I just want to remind everybody you got a bunch of ways you can enjoy this show. First is on YouTube. So if you're watching this right now on YouTube, please take a second to like this video, comment down below with your waiver wire questions, and make sure you're subscribed to this channel because we're also going to be answering all of your questions throughout the week for start sit matchups, trade questions, whatever you've got. And yeah, we're also on the audio side as well, where we're going to be back on Tuesdays, where we're going to be looking at the 10 biggest questions in fantasy football and just keeping it topical, keeping it loose, having some fun. That's going to be on the audio side only, where we also have Fridays on the audio side only with Dave and Jeff Bell, where they take a look at all the news and notes throughout the week and update you guys on the injury reports from practices. And as always, Sunday morning, we've got the Sunday morning live start sit show with Joey Wright, Jagger May, Jeff Bell, Adam Hutchison, and a whole slew of football guy staffers. So make sure you are subscribed to the YouTube and on the podcast side. Dave, I'm going to go with my first pick here. And I kind of wanted to go with some bigger names, but since we are doing that threshold, which by the way, I didn't mention at the beginning of the show, we do kind of that like 60% availability, 70, 80, 90. We keep going down the line. I'm going to go with someone who's a little bit more heavily rostered in fantasy leagues. And I'm going to go with Hunter Henry. By the way, did you know that Sunday was National Tight Ends Day? Did you know that?
You don't say, Alfredo. I had no idea.
National Tight Ends Day. Wow. Yeah, it was only mentioned 47 times per hour. It was awful. But anyways, Hunter Henry, he's been tight end 9 over the last 3 weeks here in fantasy football. Like there's not many guys you can actually rely on at this point. And I know that we had some really big you know, boom games for some guys like Kyle Pitts and a few other tight ends, but there haven't really been a lot of tight ends you've been able to rely on week in and week out. And Hunter Henry, he's had at least 5 receptions or a touchdown in every game over the last 3 weeks here. And it looks like there's just some sort of stability for him in this Patriots offense because they don't really have anything else they can count on. Even the running back situation where we thought we would be able to count on one guy, you can't really do that. And so it just seems like no matter who the quarterback is, Hunter Henry's pretty safe. He will get his targets. Are the Patriots always going to be in scoring position? No, but I mean, they're also not the worst team in the AFC East right now. So there's a little glimmer of hope there. And the Patriots, we thought that they might be trading for a wide receiver at some time soon. Maybe Deontay Johnson still ends up being a thing, but I think they were probably looking at Christian Kirk. That doesn't seem like that's going to happen after the injury. And there's actually some pretty good matchups down the stretch for Hunter Henry here. You've got the Bears, the Rams, the Colts, some pretty good matchups coming up. So if you are struggling at tight end and you're not sure who to go with, and Hunter Henry's still available for you, go out and grab Hunter Henry off the waiver wire.
Yeah, I'd like to see, hopefully Drake May comes back last week because it looked like Drake May and Hunter Henry were really starting to develop a pretty nice connection there, but was able to pick up a little bit with Jacoby Brissett, which Jacoby Brissett looked better yesterday than he did in his early season starts. I think, a couple of weeks on the bench may have helped him reset a little bit, but yeah, the Patriots right now, I think, are surprising a lot of people. I mean, not that they're doing great by any means, but they beat the Jets, and I don't think anybody had that on their preseason bingo card.
Uh, Listen, it was on mine. It was on my. I said it all off season. The Jets were going to be a dumpster fire. It was going to happen.
I still
There's
think
plenty of
there's
time.
time to salvage the team, though.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
just
There's
one
tons
thing
of
that
time
they're
for
really
sure.
missing, and I think Jordy Nelson just another receiver that has good connection with Aaron Rod if they could just bring in a guy
James
like Jordy
Jones
Nelson, yeah, maybe James
or
Jones,
Michael
Greg
Finley,
Jennings, yeah, a guy like that could really help push this team over the edge. I hope they do the right thing.
James Starks. Let's just
Mm.
keep naming random Packers.
Yeah,
That'll be good
this
for the next
this
segment.
Brees Hall, Braylon Allen backfield committee has been fun, but throw a little Ahmad Green in there, and then we're cooking with gas.
Some Eddie Lacy. He's been
We're
working
just
the
testing each
Ozempic.
other at
All
this
right.
point. All right. I think Michael
Let's go.
Finley could come in and out right now and outscore Tyler Conklin.
No, don't besmirch the name of Tyler Conklin.
Got a
I'm back
touchdown.
on Team Conklin.
He did.
I'm back
Yep.
on Team Conklin. All right, let's go to the next one here, Dave. You got pick 3. Looks like you're going with our thumbnail guy.
Hmm, yeah, because I'm sure most people looking at the thumbnail are going, "Who the hell is that? I've never seen that face in my life." Cedric Tillman, man, he has been balling out for the last couple of weeks. 21 targets, 180 yards, and 2 touchdowns over his last 2 games. This is my number one waiver wire pickup of the week, and I mentioned Bo Nix first because he's available in more leagues. But Cedric Tillman is a guy that you need to go out and get. I talked about it last week. His skill set is tailor made for Jameis Winston. He is not an elite separator. He's not a guy who's going to win on timing routes and things of that nature. He is a go up and get it contested catch specialist who likes to operate deep downfield. And Jameis Winston is a guy who likes throwing the ball deep downfield into coverage. So it just makes so much sense that these guys are quickly building a relationship with each other. Right now there's a lot of wide receivers hurt, a lot of wide receivers hurt, and you're probably hurting. So the way that we're normally talking about running backs who stumble into opportunity at this point in the season and say, go out and blow your fab on them, we've dealt with enough of high profile wide receiver injuries that I think that you need to go out and do that on Cedric Tillman right now. So 30-40% in your deeper leagues, I don't think is crazy to think about at all. I mean, this is a guy who is going to continue operating as the team's wide receiver one. And technically, Elijah Moore did lead the team in targets, and I think that he's going to continue to see targets. But I think the high value targets are going to continue going Cedric Tillman's way as he draws them deep downfield, has the ability to score touchdowns. He's a fun player who hasn't done much for the first year and a half of his career. But I think as long as Jameis is the starter, which I don't know how you bench him after that win yesterday, I think I could be wrong, but I think Jameis locked down the job for the rest of the season. And I think as long as he's starting, we're going to keep looking at pretty solid production from Cedric Tillman.
Honestly, I don't see how he's not only the starter for the rest of the season, but just the starter going forward.
Well,
He's
it's the
still
Browns we're talking about. They'll do something
I
stupid.
know, but I mean, maybe we talk about this on tomorrow's audio only episode, but I think the Deshaun Watson thing is done for forever.
Should
I
be.
would not be I would not be surprised if this is the Jameis Winston show. And listen, they went up against the Baltimore Ravens, who I said have actually been surprisingly bad against the pass. So this was slightly projectable, but I'm going to be surprised. I want to see how well the Browns do going forward. I have a similar guy in my top pick here in the waiver wires, and I'll just go with my next pick. And number 4 is Elijah Moore. He's been the wide receiver 21 over the last 2 games, not in Cedric Tillman territory, but like you said, he led the team in targets this past week, a ridiculous 29% target share in week 8. They do have, and this is what concerns me about both Tillman and Elijah Moore, they have the hardest remaining fantasy schedule of any wide receiver group in the NFL. So that's something that if you're saying, well, these guys aren't that great, but they're getting the targets, you kind of have to mentally learn how to live with that. You're just looking at a lot of targets on a team that's going to probably have to throw plenty against a really tough schedule. And so the reason, I mean, you already picked Tillman, but the reason I'm going to go with Moore here is simply because he's going to play out of the slot. And I know that Jameis, we think of him and we think of all the downfield stuff, but with Moore and the tough matchups that these wide receivers are going to have, I kind of want to go with the guy that has a likelihood of soaking up some targets underneath, while you're going to have Njoku, Tillman, Judy being the guys that are going to be stretching out the field. Give me some of those easy targets underneath if that's what I'm going for here, right? Because I don't think we see Tillman or Moore or any of these Browns wide receivers as anything more than a wide receiver 3 flex play. I don't know that you're ever going to be starting Tillman as a wide receiver 2 easily in your roster, or Elijah Moore for that matter. So that's why I'm going to go with these guys. But Dave, I think these guys have to be, each of them, the top waiver wire priorities this week.
So let's talk through it and, peek behind the curtain. I selfishly steal all the good waiver wire pickups for myself and then leave Alfredo to go through the scraps here. So
Yes.
obviously you're talking about Elijah Moore, and I think that he's worth a pickup as well. But if you're in a position where you need a wide receiver and Tillman and Moore are both available, I got to imagine you're probably leaning towards Tillman ahead of
Yeah,
Elijah Moore, right? Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah.
30-40% on Tillman in your deep leagues, in shallower leagues, maybe 15% or so. Where are you at with Elijah Moore? I mean, probably I'm thinking deeper leagues, 12 to 15%, shallow leagues, maybe 5% or so.
Yeah, I'm probably around there. I think the thing is that what happens is you start to get this FOMO of like last week, Cedric Tillman went off, and that availability went really like it actually went pretty far down for him. Cedric Tillman's at 76% availability in sleeper leagues, while Elijah Moore is available in 92% of leagues.
Right.
So I do think that in a lot of the very competitive leagues, and I assume that the people watching this and listening each day are the competitive ones that want the edge in their league. Cedric Tillman might already be off the board in your league, and Elijah Moore becomes that guy. So if Tillman's off the board and Elijah Moore is there, and you're needing that wide receiver help, you lost Brandon Ayuk, you lost Christian Kirk, you just keep going down the line, you're losing players. I mean, yeah, throw a good bit of fab on there. We're getting to that point in the season, Dave. You can't take it with you. Like you
Right.
have to be able to make a move. So if you just simply need a starter, like yeah, I'm throwing 15% on an Elijah Moore in some of those deeper leagues, maybe even more, honestly. Like let's just we're at that point. I don't think I'm going to hold back too much on the waiver wire.
I picked up Cedric Tillman before last week's game, knowing that the opportunity would be there without Amari Cooper, and he had a big blow up game. And then on a Saturday morning, Blake Corum was available in my league, and I'm a Kyron Williams manager. And I said, I want to handcuff him just in
Yeah,
case. Drop Cedric Tillman for Blake Corum, and I am kicking myself this morning. I don't know if I go back out there and
are you
try to
going to
get
drop
him
like
or seriously. I think I'm just gonna stick with Blake Corum and lick my wounds on this one. I've got a nice wide receiver room, but that one hurts knowing that I dropped Cedric Tillman 24 hours before another blow up game.
yeah, I mean, just be ready to live with the ups and downs of the
Yep.
Browns and Jameis Winston. Like we've seen it before, even on good teams, there are going to be ups and downs. This was definitely an up, but there are some potentials for downs here. Dave, let's go forward here into our next pick. Dave, you're up with pick 5. Who you going with?
I'm gonna go with Roschon Johnson, and I've talked about this guy a little bit now throughout the season. He's available, and then he's not available, but it's impossible to ignore the production that he's seen. 4 touchdowns in his last 4 games. He is the clear RB2. We're both big Khalil Herbert fans, Alfredo, but
Mm.
it doesn't seem like Matt Eberflus and Shane Waldron are for whatever reason.
God, just
He is just.
trade him. Just trade him to the Cowboys and let him flourish. That's all I want. That's
I
all
don't.
I want.
Yeah, I don't know how Herbert would carve out a role with Dalvin Cook and Ezekiel Elliott, two all-time great running backs. It is kind of funny. I was trying so hard not to make the joke on Twitter yesterday because it was so played out, but just like imagine if you were told a few years back that those two guys would be on a team together. But yeah, trade Khalil Herbert. That would be great. There's so many better opportunities for him out there. But right now, Roschon Johnson is getting a ton of touches, and it's coming at the expense of DeAndre Swift, unfortunately, because anytime they get near the end zone, Roschon comes into the game. But Chicago's been running the ball a lot. They've got a below average pass rate. Roschon Johnson is getting little sprinkles of touches here. He's not a guy that I'd really feel comfortable relying on outside of super deep leagues. But I think what we can take away is that he is the clear RB2. If you're desperate during bye weeks, you might plug him in as a flex and hope that he can maintain the touchdown rate that we've seen so far this year. But at worst, you're locking up a guy who is a DeAndre Swift injury away from a big workload.
So, Dave, let's do a little quizzy quiz here. Over the last 5 weeks in half PPR on a points per game basis, where do you think Roschon Johnson ranks?
I'm going to guess RB 14.
Whoa, no, relax. Take it easy, pal.
I mean, he's averaging a touchdown a game.
Not quite. I mean,
You said over his
just
last 4 games.
over the last 4 games. It was 5 weeks. He had a bye in week 7.
I mean, per game, he's got to be around 11 points. Yeah, I guess that would be probably like RB 21 is my guess.
Okay, no,
Final
this is
answer.
you made this so much worse. Never mind. I was about to tell you, like, it's actually pretty impressive that he's an RB3. He's averaging eight
No.
and a half PPR points per game.
Oh,
He's
it's been
RB
all
35.
touchdowns. All right.
Yeah, he's RB. Well, he's getting like 2 carries, 1 touchdown, 3 yards. Like it's those kind of games for him. But he's ahead of guys like Sean Tucker, Tyler Algier, Justice Hill, Austin Eckler, guys that for so many leagues are just no brainers. We roster them, we keep them, right? Zach Moss, Tajay Spears, Ray Davis, all these players that we all have on our benches, no problem. Yeah, what I'm getting at here is that, yeah, sure, there's the touchdown upside, and that's definitely buoying it quite a bit. But I think we see that he's the clear backup in
I will say
Chicago,
it,
and
it's
that's the big thing.
hilarious looking at his per game output. Like in a game where he scored a touchdown, 8.6 points. In a game where he scored two touchdowns, 14.5 points. In another game where he scored a touchdown, 6.6 points. I mean, you look at that, it's like 90% of his fantasy production is coming on the back of touchdowns right now, but he's an injury away guy more than anything else.
And he's only looking at the points per game rankings during that span. He's only 2 spots below Jordan Mason, who was a running back 33, Devon Achane, who was running back 32. It's like it's
I'm
nuts.
almost
The
at the
running back
point,
position is
we're talking
disgusting.
about players to drop. Like, are we dropping Jordan Mason now? Heading into a bye week? Like, looks like he has not been playing well the last few weeks. Obviously, he's been dealing with injuries over the last 2 weeks that have really inhibited his play. But what I saw from Isaac Guerendo yesterday was better than anything I've seen from Jordan Mason since week one. I mean, Jordan Mason, I think, surprised a lot of people in week one, and then they kind of put a clamp on him. Isaac Guerendo looked good yesterday. He's got that Kyle Shanahan, I'm just going to put my head down and run as hard as I can into the first defender that I see mentality. And I mean, Christian McCaffrey, we're expecting him to come back after the bye, but I think Guerendo might have done enough yesterday to lock down that RB2 role.
I can't wait to bring back Jagger for the running back rankings
Yeah.
after all the Jordan Mason nonsense. All right, let's go to the next player on here. I'm going to go with another wide receiver. Like you said, there's not a lot of good running backs out here. I'm going to go with Parker Washington, the wide receiver for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And with Christian Kirk breaking his collarbone, I believe that's what it was.
Out for the year, they
Washington
said.
yeah, Washington immediately took over that role, and he's done this before when Christian Kirk has been hurt. He immediately goes into that role, but this time Gabe Davis was also hurt, so it's really just it's Parker Washington, it's Brian Thomas who's been phenomenal, and then you've got the tight ends. So you're probably also going to see quite a bit of Brenton Strange over the next few weeks, and you're going to see some two tight end sets. Doug Peterson's always really liked to do that, but Parker Washington, I'm not going to say he's some sort of world beater, but last time he had an opportunity like this, he had a top 20 finish and a top 36 finish in back-to-back weeks. Now, it wasn't something that, persisted over a long period of time. He was not a must grab player, but in a week like this where there's not a lot and we're talking about wide receiver threes that you can go pick up off the waiver wire, I'm happy to go and do that. And I'm happy to put, let's call it 5% of my fab on a player like this, depending on really how desperate you are at the wide receiver position and how deep your league is. Uh, Dave, I think I'm going to call him another one of these desperation wide receiver three flex plays going forward.
Yeah, and that's kind of like the best case scenario. We didn't bury the lead. We opened the show saying that it was a pretty thin week for waivers, and here we are on the seventh guy of the show, and we're
This was
already in
not
Parker
clickbait.
Washington territory. Yeah, it's a tough week, but that's a good thing because it means a lot of players stayed healthy.
Sure. That's a
That's going to
good
be
that's
my
a
my
good good
takeaway.
good silver lining
Uh
to
huh.
have. All right, let's speed this up here. Let's go to the next players that we sorta kinda maybe don't wanna pick up from waivers, but we have to because we're obliged.
Yeah, I mean we're getting desperate here, but Jonnu Smith is available in almost 90% of leagues. This is a week where Pat Fryermuth and George Kittle are both going to be on bye. You might be looking for somebody. Jonnu Smith is averaging 7 targets per game over the last 3 weeks. He has seen a minimum 6 targets in every single one of those games. Wasn't sure what he'd look like with Tua back, but he still saw 6 targets yesterday, which is very healthy for a tight end to see. He's an athletic guy. They want to get the ball in his hands. If you've got Pat Fryermuth or George Kittle and you don't have a backup tight end and Jonnu Smith is available, I guess you can do worse with players you're picking up off the waiver wire.
Jonnu Smith, baby, paws up. Pride of the FIU Panthers, let's go.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Jonnu fan, and I know you scouted this man as a high school athlete, so I know he's a big part of your story here. I will say if Hunter Henry's available, I prefer Hunter Henry as a week 9 streaming option, but Jonnu Smith, man, an athletic guy with big speed that can always rip off a big play. We haven't really seen it so far in this Miami offense, but they're continuing to get the ball to him, and that's promising to see.
Jonnu Smith over the last 4 weeks, tight end 13 in,
Without a touchdown, I believe, too, right?
yeah, yeah, and that's also just in total. That's not even in points per game. In points per game, he's tight end 10 because we
Yeah.
have to remove the Dolphins bye. He's
Mm,
ahead of in points per game, ahead of Evan Ingram, David Njoku, Sam Laporta, and
wow,
Dalton Kincaid.
wow.
Fantasy football is broken. That's where we're at. So yeah, I think I'm with you. I prefer Hunter Henry over Jonnu Smith, but is another one of those. If you're desperate at tight end, you don't know what else to do. These are some of those guys that you can just plug in. Hopefully, they're still available in your leagues. Last one I'm going to go with here, and we talked about this a little bit, but let's add a little extra context to this. I saved this for the last pick. Isaac Guerendo, running back for the San Francisco 49ers. He's available in 91% of leagues. And we kind of did like the double dutch thing where we like hopped in for a little bit and then we hopped back out. No, you know what? That's the hokey pokey. That's the hokey pokey. That's what we're gonna do. But double dutch, you do that as well. You kind of get in, right? Are you familiar with all of the childhood things? Yeah.
Yeah, I've never been much of a jump roper myself, but I know what the double dutch is.
Do you hokey pokey?
Haven't in a while, but I'm sure I can. If I had to do it, I'm sure it would come
If the
rushing
situation
back to
arises,
me. Yeah, I'm
yeah,
sure I'd remember how to hokey pokey if the time came.
that's what it's all about, Dave.
Put your left hand
Uh,
in and your left hand out. That one.
yeah, no, yeah,
Yeah,
you can put any
got it.
appendage in.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, hand or feet. Yeah, yeah. As a Grindo, running back for the
You
San
can put
Francisco.
any
Okay,
appendage in. All right.
nope, nope,
Uh,
nope, nope. Pause. We're not doing that. This always happens, man, like 20, 30 minutes into the show. Isaac Guerendo, running back for the San Francisco 49ers. So this is going to be an interesting one to watch. I don't even quite know what to do here, Dave. The whole thing is that like everyone picked him up, we dropped him. Jordan Mason gets hurt again. He hasn't even looked good. Isaac Grindo, like you said, has looked great, and he's got everything that we typically see from Kyle Shanahan and what he wants out of his running backs. He fits the system perfect. He's really one of those downhill runners that you just get him out in space, and he makes the one cut and he's gone. It's I think we kind of look at him very similarly to Isaiah Pacheco, but I think he's a little bit more finesse than Pacheco. And
Probably a little bit more long speed too, if we're being honest.
yeah. I mean, well, this was track star type
Yeah.
stuff when he was at the NFL Combine. And that's when his name really came up to a lot of people. Um, but the Niners have a bye week in Week 9. So any excitement that you had about him maybe starting next week immediately goes out the window because there is no next week for the Niners. And then we have the news that CMC Christian McCaffrey should be back in week 10. He's reportedly going to be practicing in week 9 throughout the bye. I don't quite know what to do. I think you get him if you already rostered Christian McCaffrey or if you already rostered Jordan Mason. And this is just your flood insurance where you don't really need it all that often, but the one time in your life where you do need it, you're kind of happy that you have it.
Yeah. And we've talked about Christian McCaffrey a lot this season so far, kind of what we expect. He's getting up there in age, and this is an injury that has a high rate of re-injury. So even if he is back in week 10, there's no guarantee that he's still there in week 17. I don't know for sure who the RB2 is going to be, but we talked about it a little bit earlier. Jordan Mason looked really good to start the season and then just kind of kept trending downward each week after that and hasn't really looked great over the last couple of weeks. And now he's dealing with this shoulder injury that's kept him limited. And Isaac Guerendo just has that Kyle Shanahan style of running the ball. And I think that it's not crazy to think that when McCaffrey comes back, Guerendo could be the RB2 ahead of Jordan Mason. So again, like you said, it's an injury away, a handcuff, whatever you want to call it. There probably isn't much standalone value for Guerendo as long as Christian McCaffrey is out there. But if he misses time, Guerendo could potentially be the guy who was giving you what Jordan Mason was giving you for the first few weeks of the season.
I mean, I'm actually willing to think here that he can. I'm willing to turn like about face a little bit here that he's probably able to give you some sort of standalone value, even if Christian McCaffrey is back. We're at the point where the Niners don't want to just send Christian McCaffrey back out there to get hurt immediately. You
This is
probably
Kyle
want to have
Shanahan
him.
we're talking about, man. I don't think he cares about player health at all. He's just going to send people out there,
I
and
think,
if he dies, he dies.
but if he didn't care about, good reference, good pull. But I feel like if he didn't care, like, wouldn't Christian McCaffrey have already been back and they would have been like, just suck it up, just get out there, right? It feels like they've really taken their time with this. They're trying to do everything they can to get over that hump and win the Super Bowl. If that means giving Isaac Guerendo 5 or 6 extra touches in like a goal line or a 4th and 1 scenario, I don't know. Like I think it's
Maybe,
very possible. You end
maybe.
up in a Roschon Johnson situation where it's
Yeah.
just 2 carries and a touchdown,
Well, let's hope not. But I mean, like look at last week, for example. Like Debo Samuel said he didn't want to play in that game, and the reports were that they kind of said like, "Ah, you're fine, just get out there and go play." When he had pneumonia, and like took a few snaps and was like, "No, like I literally cannot play." But that was like after they kind of forced him out there, and I almost wonder if some of the lack of transparency that we got regarding Christian McCaffrey is because Kyle Shanahan in his head was just like, well, he's going to play. He's banged up and he's just going to play through it because it does seem like Kyle Shanahan is the type of guy that is just going to kind of force players to play through injury. I don't know if you saw yesterday, Jordan Mason left early with a shoulder injury and they asked him about it and he said if you can't play, you can't play. This is how we operate. Next man up. And that next man up is Isaac. And that's just kind of you play until you're too hurt to play, and then on to the next guy. So it wouldn't surprise me if either way. We've talked about Christian McCaffrey potentially not playing at all for the rest of the season. We've talked about him coming back and re-injuring himself. It also wouldn't surprise me if Christian McCaffrey in Week 10 sees 100% of the backfield touches, and Kyle Shanahan just says we're going to ride this man till the wheels fall off.
Kyle Shanahan is the single mother with the sick kid. It's just like, no, you're going to school. I don't care what you have. You're going to. I'm not taking you to work. I'm not paying for a babysit. You're going to school.
Yeah,
That was my mom every single time. I could have had a 107-degree fever. She's like, yeah, you're going to school. That's free childcare.
I have
That's what we're
a
doing.
fun story about that once. I was about 12 years old, and it was Sunday morning, and I'd been complaining about stomach pains for days on end. And finally, it's Sunday morning. Everybody's getting ready for church in the family, and I'm in bed crying, holding my stomach, saying like, I can't go to church. And my mom is just brushing it off, saying, "No, put your clothes on. We're going to church. I'm not dealing with this." Like,
Told you, just need Jesus, Dave.
yeah, and it got to the point where, like, they were getting ready to leave. My mom's yelling at me saying, "We're leaving in 5 minutes," and I broke down crying, and I was like, "I literally can't move." Took me to the hospital. My appendix had been ruptured for 2 days. Like, I've been walking around an entire weekend. I had gangrene. Like, that's something I thought that didn't
What?
exist beyond, like, the Civil War. I
What
had
were you doing?
I had they called it I had gangrenous, like, infection in my stomach. It ended up being this
What
like
were you
huge
doing?
surgery because for 2 days I was telling my mom that I was deathly ill, and she just thought that I was trying to get out of church and get out of school, and I'm literally walking around with a ruptured appendix.
It's so great. I have a similar thing. I broke my foot, and my mom was like, "Ah, you sprained your ankle. We'll see how it does in the morning." Same thing. We went like 3 days
Mhm.
because it was really swollen. She's like, "Well, it's just really bruised and swollen. We don't know. They're not gonna be able to detect anything on the X-rays." Same thing. Same thing.
Yep.
Shout out to moms. We love you guys. You make us tougher. Shout out to Kyle Shanahan too. Makes his players tougher. All right, let's take a look at some of the other players to add the honorable mentions that were kept off the list here. Dave, I think it's just good, sensible fantasy football advice to just say if there is any sort of handcuff running back available on the waiver wire, go and add them. Don't play this game where you try to outbid everyone later on in the season. If you've got the bench depth, if you have the available space, if you have the available fab, do it now before these guys end up costing a ton. I know we're just speculating here, but the names like Ray Davis, Blake Corum, Kamani Vidal, Tyler Algier, all these names that are just sitting on plenty of waiver wires, they are one injury away
Mhm.
from every single fantasy analyst saying, drop 50% of your fab on this guy, drop the rest of it, drop 100% of your fab on this guy. He's going to save your season. If you could do it now and you could hold on to these players, like this is the time to go out and get that insurance.
Yeah, and I say this in the preseason, I say it early in the season, but no time in the year is it more important than right now. There's no reason for having deep depth at other positions. Like you don't need a backup quarterback, you don't need a backup tight end. If you can start, 3 wide receivers and a flex, there's no reason to have more than 5 receivers on your team. Like you kind of want that one extra guy that you can rotate in for buys and injuries. But outside of maybe 1 or 2 extra receivers, my entire bench right now is just full of these guys that are an injury away because one, an injury happens, and then you suddenly get a guy that you can elevate into your starting lineup, or two, an injury happens, one of these guys explodes in value, and then you can trade it to somebody in your league to address a position of need. So, yeah, this is the time of year, especially if you are sitting above 500, looks like you are trending to make the playoffs. Start dropping those wide receiver fives, those wide receiver sixes, those backup quarterbacks, and just load up on these injury away running backs.
Some of the other names here on this list: Taysom Hill, who's allegedly a tight end, but whatever he might be. And then Jameis Winston is the other guy at the quarterback spot. I think you're going to get a lot of like go out and get Matthew Stafford, and sure, like that's one as well. You know, Puka and Cooper Cup, they're back, and everything looks good there again. Jameis Winston, where would you think of him, Dave? And not necessarily where you have him ranked, but if you can kind of ballpark this, is he kind of a top 12 quarterback in your head rest of way, or are you streaming him based on the matchups? Because the schedule is kind of challenging for the Browns.
Yeah, I think it's that. You can stream him with matchups. I think he falls into that bucket with a lot of other streamers that you're kind of elevating. We'll have some weeks where he's inside the top 12. We'll have some weeks where he's outside of the top 20. And again, I've talked about it. There's like kind of five guys that like aren't streaming quarterbacks. Like if you've got Josh Allen, if you've got Jalen Hurts, if you've got Jaden Daniels, if you've got Lamar Jackson, you've got a plug and play quarterback. Outside of those guys, I feel like you're almost streaming every other quarterback. And I think Jameis Winston falls into that discussion. So I'm not ready to say he's top 12 yet, but the ceiling is there. And I just want to point out something. JJ Zachariason yesterday tweeted that, Jameis Winston obviously had a 300-yard game, which was very exciting. Deshaun Watson hasn't had a 300-yard game since January of 2021. Now, I don't want to pile on a guy who just, has been
It's okay.
terrible and ended his
All
season,
out.
but I wanted to look just for the heck of it. I said, who are some other guys who have had a 300-yard game since Deshaun Watson had
Yes.
his last 300-yard game? You ready for some of these names, Alfredo?
Let's go. Let's go. I'm so excited.
Philip Rivers,
Yes.
Ben Roethlisberger, Tom
Yes.
Brady, Matt
Yes.
Ryan,
Yes.
Josh Johnson, and
Yes.
Colt McCoy are all
Yes.
guys who have thrown for 300 yards more recently than Deshaun Watson has. Yeah, let's
Two of
talk
those
about
guys have been Cleveland Browns quarterbacks as well. Josh
yeah.
Johnson, Colt McCoy.
And almost everybody else is retired. Like these are old men, like 40 years old, sitting at home, icing their knees, and they have done this more frequently than Watson. And I think that is we're doing our new show tomorrow, the 10 things that we want to talk about, which I'm very excited about. We just kind of get to riff and talk about whatever. We are absolutely going to talk about
Yeah.
Deshaun Watson, whether it's one of my talking points or one of yours, because I think his future in the league, his future with the Browns is absolutely something worth discussing.
Yeah. Yeah, and when like Dave just said here, we're gonna be back again tomorrow on the audio side. So if you are not subscribed to the podcast and only subscribe to the YouTube, please, you'll see the link in the description down below. Click on that, whether you listen on Apple or Spotify, subscribe to the podcast there because we're gonna be doing this every Tuesday where we are going to be answering the 10 biggest questions that we have surrounding the NFL and fantasy football. And it's gonna be a little bit more of like the loose structure, not so transactional of these are your starts, these are your trades, these are your waivers, this is a ranking. We're just gonna be talking ball, having some fun, a little less buttoned up. Dave and I are just gonna be in hoodies in the dark when we do this. That's how we always do the off-camera pods. But yeah, as always, I want to thank everybody for watching, listening all the way through. That's gonna do it for us today. For myself, for Dave Kluge. Thank you guys as always. We'll see you next time. Adios.